Welcome everyone. Welcome to the CEMS webinar series, episode 21. And today's topic will be about servant leadership and authentic leadership. It will be a very interactive session. So if you have anything to say or have any questions for the speakers, just let us know and then we can discuss that. But first, allow me to introduce you to the speakers of today. And at first we have Leroy from Rotterdam School of Management. And he is interested in authentic leadership, how to develop it, but also the concept of authenticity, mindfulness, all the other related topics. And we have Professor Milton de Sousa today with us. And he's also very passionate, but then about servant leadership and paradoxes within leadership and social innovation. So for today, like I said, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to raise your hand or just let us know in the chat, and then we can get to your questions. Today we'll have the format of an interview, so me and Caroline will interview both the speakers, and then we can discuss any questions that you have. But first, we are going to start with a Mentimeter. Interesting. Hans and Milton, what do you think? Is this something that you also see in your research, or is this completely new to you?
I think I'm in the wrong session. It's nothing to do with what we're going to talk about. No. Sounds all very familiar.
It's interesting. I have to make sure I read everything. It's funny that the size means kind of how many people mention that word, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So responsibility and empathy are the most commonly mentioned.
Yeah, and then vulnerability for, What do you make of responsibility first, Milton? I'm almost curious to hear more from the people who put responsibility out there. Like why that link? I have my ideas, but I'm actually really curious to hear of the people who put that there.
Yeah, that was also something that that stands out there, being quite central. Now, to be totally honest, I wasn't expecting that one. I think it fits well, but I didn't expect it to be so prominent.
Yeah, that's why I'm so curious. I'm putting people on the spot here, but if somebody wrote down responsibility, why did you wrote down responsibility? How do you see that linked? I'm very curious. We know Elena wrote it down because she revealed it in the chat. Sorry, Elena.
Would anyone like to say a few words? It's all right.
Hey, we can talk the whole time. No worries here, but we're actually hoping to learn from you guys as well. All right. Well, while people are gathering courage, Milton, let's dig in, shall we? I think empathy is a clear one linked to servant leadership. No?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean that one resonates quite strongly with the notion of servant leadership, because it is an other-centric type of leadership where your main concern is the other, and in order for you to understand the other, you need to develop that empathy. Really try to put yourself in the other's shoes, and not only cognitively understand the person, but also emotionally resonate with what they go through, right? So that you develop that empathy that allows you to serve better. So that clearly empathy is an important element of the servant leadership concept. Although it's interesting because it's implicit to it somehow, but in all the sort of formulations of servant leadership and all the different measures and instruments, is actually not explicitly put in there, at least not worded as empathy so much, right? It is other centricity is very much part of it, caring about serving others, but the notion of empathy is not explicitly mentioned, but I would say definitely it's part of it. Yeah.
Can I ask you, Milton? Maybe this is the excuse of a non-empathic man, but that sounds like a lot of work, to be honest. I mean, especially now in pandemic times, right? I mean, everybody's feeling the stress and it keeps on going. I can imagine that a leader can fill their whole day with nothing but empathy and listening and trying to put themselves. But at the end of the day, tasks also still need to be done. How do you justify this empathy?
Yeah, it is. I just came across this one article yesterday, and I haven't had a time to read it in detail. So I'm just improvising here as we speak. But the title of the article is called "Serving You Depletes Me?" ? And it's exactly about what you're saying, right? Because this attitude of serving and this willingness to serve does, take energy, and it means that you need to be continuously in that process of trying to understand the other and empathizing with others. But of course, as you say, there are other things that need to be done, and maybe more mundane, operational, task-oriented things that need also to be addressed. And apparently they talk about something called perspective taking, right? So if you want to be sure that serving doesn't deplete you entirely, you need to be mindful of, your own time, your own energy, but also how you need to engage in this idea of perspective taking about the other, right? And then once you understand why you do it and why it's relevant for others, it doesn't deplete you necessarily. But I mean, I haven't explored the article in detail to give you too much insightful information there. But yes, and I think that's very much about the idea of servant leadership. Just because you're we call it a servant leader, it doesn't mean that you kind of neglect some other more transactional elements that come with any form of leadership, right? So it's not like you're there waking up in the morning and asking people, "What can I do for you today?" There's still an equally important element of leading in a more traditional sense to it, for you to be able to actually run an organization and move things forward, right? So it's more about you being mindful about why you do what you do and why does it matter for others, and how can your organization be at the service of others. And in sometimes it might be more central, but it might be more top of mind and more relevant for the task you have. In other cases, it might not be so obvious, but you need to to strike a balance between these two elements of serving and leading. So for you to be able to do both, right? So they coexist, right? So, and actually Robert Greenleaf, when he talked about, and that's the first sort of instigator of this idea of servant leadership, the main difference he sets is in the sequence, right? So a servant leader is servant first, right? What he says is that your first motivation is to serve. And then you aspire to lead, because by leading, you can serve better, right? But the leading element is very much part of it as well, right? So, and you have many people who are just servants in the sense that they try to help, but they don't take a leading role. And here you have to do both. So that's my view indeed on your observation that empathy takes a lot of time and energy, right? So it's very true. Yeah.
Can I ask you a follow-up question to that? You were forewarned, right?
I know, but go ahead, Hannes. Go ahead.
All right. Let's say I'm about to finish my studies and I'm about to go for my first job, and I've heard great things about a certain organization and so. But people have warned me, like, you have to watch out what leader that you work for, because leaders can make you leave an organization. They can have a big impact on your happiness and potentially whether or not you get promoted and your success as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a junior person looking for my next leader. This idea of an empathic servant leader But how do I know that this person is truly empathic, that they're not just faking it in the job interview just to get me on board, and then when I actually start working out, they turn out to be a more abusive supervisor? Well, what are like your secret telltale signs that you know the person that you're about to work with is actually somebody who is empathic and responsible and generous and things like that?
Yeah, I mean that's and this is where I think, Hannes, the whole issue of authenticity also comes in, right? So to what extent is a servant leader authentic, or is he or she just playing a game or putting up an act to look like one, right? So engaging what we call impression management, right? And of course we do know that, especially when you're trying to attract new talent into the organization, you might overpromise, you might downplay the less positive sides of the organization, and then once you start working, you might get quite disappointed. So I think that a very good test to check whether this servant attitude is authentic is actually the recruitment process itself and the way they conduct it, right? So if you sense that, you know, to what extent does the recruitment process include getting a realistic perspective on the organization? To what extent do they themselves, the people recruiting, tell as much about the good things about the organization as they tell about the bad things about the organization and the difficulties they're having? So the sense of honesty that you get in the interviewing process will tell a lot about the culture that you have, and whether it's reliable, right? That the information they provide is actually accurate, and that they're not trying to sugarcoat the position too much to try to get you in. It's always a bit of a struggle, because at the end of the day, if you make it so negative, it's just people that's like might be quite scared. But the good companies that do this well, for the Southwest does that a lot, they actually include top managers, and they include people with serious responsibilities in recruiting very young talent, right? So that is also a good sign that there's a culture of humility in the organization, that even those with very busy agendas make their time to be with the youngsters that will come into the organization, right? If you're just talking with some, a recruiter and not getting an insight into the real managers of the organization, that might not be a good sign, right? So having a sense of honesty, that people are sharing also not the negative things about the organization as much as they share about the good things about the organization, getting top management involvement during the recruitment process, and of course the way they engage in the conversation, right? So I remember, I have a very good anecdotal example. Once I was applying to a consulting firm, I won't say the name because and I had one of the best questions I've ever had in an interview, and he was a CEO of the company, right? It was a small consulting firm, it was just a few hundred of people. And then we sat down and looked at me in the eyes and said, "Milton, what can we do for you?" And that really put me off, because usually when you're going through an interview, they ask, "Hey, tell me about who you are. What have you done so far? How could you help us?" And this one guy just came to me, looked, and very honestly asked, "What can we do for you? What are your dreams? Right? How could we make your dreams come true somehow?" And of course, we were in the dance there trying to align my view and his view. And of course, is that an act? Is it real? It felt real. But having this sort of, when the conversation really revolves around how can we serve you, how can we help you, how can we contribute to your life as much as you can contribute to ours, that to me was a good sign of someone who really cared about who I am, and not just yet another human resource, which is a very unfortunate term on its own, right? So you're like a resource, right?
I like that perspective. The last thing that you said, and I agree with the others, and I have examples that align with that. But this last thing, it seems to be that servant leadership also comes with kind of a developmental attitude. Like what can I do? Like, you're going to enter as a human being in that organization. Are they there just instrumentally to use you?
Yeah.
Or are they there to help you on your life path, on your journey, right? So there seems to be like a holistic view on a human being,
yeah.
a genuine willingness to to say like, hey, what is your path? And let's see if we can help you to unfold and help you grow into your full potential. And if you get like a genuine indication that that is their, the way that they look at you as a full, complete human being. And yeah, you're right. Most organizations wouldn't do that, right?
No, unfortunately not. It's not like what we would normally see. And of course, in this time, and it's even more, it's interesting to look, for instance, we see an increasing number of companies using AI tools to recruit, right? So for the first and second filters, eliminating candidates almost automatically. You might even run an entire interview with a robot and you're not even aware of that. And it makes me wonder, right? So to what extent can you actually instill a serving culture or servant leadership culture in a place where, a lot of the work is automated, even recruitment is automated, right? So, and that means then, and you could potentially program the robot to be, to ask questions in a servant leadership style, right? But will that then be an authentic organization, authentic style? You just program it like that. I don't know what your views are on that. Can you automate it, and still be authentic in an organization? I don't know. Can you program the authenticity of the organization in a robot? Just a side question. I didn't prepare for this question at all. Just popped up in my mind. So.
In some ways, unless these robots develop consciousness and we find ourselves in a Terminator world, I mean, they're programmed to serve, right? So
Sure.
By the very definition, all the computers that we're currently talking to, they are programmed to serve. Although sometimes I feel like my computer has a mind of its own.
I think if you allow me just a quick note there, because I'd like to hear from you also on this element of, when you talk about authenticity, and I think that relates to servant leadership, but also other forms of leadership, right? I remember, and since we're talking about robots, I watched this, you probably have seen the movie Interstellar, right? Where it's really nice science fiction movie, it's really cool. And there's a robot in there that plays a very important role in the entire movie. It's like you really develop actually an empathy for that robot, because I'm not sure if it's a he or she or it or as a male voice, but in any case, there's a point where he's is adjusting his programming to the level of honesty that human beings can tolerate, and the level of humor that human beings can tolerate. So. And the main character at some point says, I don't remember his name, adjust humor and honesty to 80% or 90%, because we humans, if we are authentic all the time, I think there's a lot of damage in relationships out there as well. At least if you're telling the truth all the time, right? So I don't know what you think about that, and whether what does authenticity mean as well? And I would be curious also to integrate that into the servant leadership concept and how you can integrate it too.
Oh, there's a lot of fodder there, and the people who are listening, as you now notice, Milton and me are gonna just hog this conversation until you stop us. So ask us questions and interrupt us, huh? Is it really smart to be authentic as a leader? Do we actually really want that in our leaders? Some people would argue that Donald Trump was the example of an authentic leader. Everything that came into his mind, he also voiced. That sounds very authentic, no? Is that the idea that we would have of an authentic and a transparent leader? I won't make this all about Donald Trump. Luckily, we can move him a little bit to the side of the equation now, right? And there's another quote from a movie. I don't know if this audience will still remember that, but it's A Few Good Men. You want the truth, you can't handle the truth. Honestly, we say we want authenticity when we say we want transparency, but then why are politicians so super scared voicing their honest opinion? Because they know that when they do, people are gonna hold them accountable and they're gonna react very strongly to their authentic ideas. And so yes, ideally a leader can set their authenticity in humor setting, and I remember the movie now, to a level that is okay for others to cope with. I'm from Rotterdam, the Netherlands, very known for its authenticity and honesty. Dutch people in general. It fits my style because I'm very straightforward, but you know that there could be cultural clashes. Other people may not appreciate the very honest, straightforward Dutch way of doing things. Now, when I say adjust your transparency, I'm not in any case advocating you should lie 20% of the time. No, I don't think lying is justified in any situation. But let's say your partner comes down from the stairs. You're ready to go to a party. This person is clearly nervous about how they dressed. And they ask you, how do I look? Yeah, you can be very transparent in that moment and say, you look horrible. But you realize you have to get out of the door and that person will feel horrible for the rest of the evening. And that type of authenticity and transparency is driven by the ego, by the person's own, like, I need to just tell you whatever I think. Sometimes you can use a white lie, or sometimes you can bend the truth when you actually have a servant interest, right? You're trying to serve the needs of the other person, right? To, save their self-esteem, to make sure that, so actually this is where kind of authenticity and servant may butt heads, but I would never advocate for a, be 100% transparent all of the time.
Can I ask you a question, Hans?
Yeah.
Like, when I thought of this webinar, it was like often authentic leadership, you have to be authentic, etc. But what is the opposite of being authentic? Is it not being authentic? Is it being honest? Is there a different, like, servant and being non-servant? Is there an opposite of being authentic?
Well, that is actually, you could say inauthentic is if you want to, is the word that people use. And they kind of refer to things like self-monitoring and people who are like chameleons. Actually, politicians is typically the example that they use as the opposite of an authentic leader, right?
But is it a bad thing?
But is it a bad thing? That's the question. Now, what's also interesting is that politicians often do nothing but manage their perceptions of authenticity. The problem with politicians is they have to be somebody else to different people. And so they're managing the different aspects of who they are. They're translating. And so they have to kind of wear different masks to different audiences. Otherwise, they would never get elected. And so the biggest misnomer, the biggest misconception that people have about authenticity is they see authenticity and something like politics as completely opposite to each other. But the research on it is clear. If you want to be authentic, or at the very least be perceived as authentic by other human beings, political skills is one of the biggest drivers of whether or not you're perceived as authentic. And that may seem weird to people, but political skills is knowing your audience, knowing how they're looking at you and so forth, and adjusting to it. And yes, you need that to generate perceptions of authenticity. Does that help a little bit, Jeroen?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, what you said, it makes sense, right? That you, if you be yourself, that's also something that's, a lot of managers say, just be yourself, and then you can lead by example, for example. But if you are constantly yourself, then maybe not everyone will like who you are, because, well, maybe in yourself you're not just a very likable person.
Look, the answer to that, indeed, we always say, whether it's a first date or the first day of school or the first new job that you enter, just be yourself and everything will be great. Well, we've done a review of the literature, and it turns out not everything will be great. Especially if just be yourself means you're going to walk in and you're going to voice all your honest ideas. You're going to get, like, in the same way that in a dating context, let's say you and me are dating right now. If I just put everything on the table in our very first date, Jeroen, I don't think we'll have a second date. I'm going to need to ease you into the weirdness that is Hannes for us to actually hit it off. And that's because we can only, deal with so much truth from the very beginning. So yes, be yourself, but maybe not too much. And the best way I found to look at this is who we are as human beings. We actually have so many different puzzles and so many different aspects to who we are. And this one piece of my puzzle, well, actually that fits really well with Melissa. But this other piece of the puzzle, well, Rita would really like that. And Carolyn would like this other. So depending on who I'm talking to, I'm not going to be inauthentic. I'm not going to fake it. I'm just going to highlight different pieces of who I am, at least on the first dates. After a while, both Melissa, Carolyn, Rita, you will see the full puzzle, but just don't throw everything out there all at once. They need time to cope with.
Yeah.
Does that
make sense? Yeah, no, it makes sense. Yeah.
Wrong, but
I'm just curious now, Milton, are there like similar paradoxes in servant leadership as well? That's, always being authentic might not be the right strategy, or is it the same with servant leadership?
I mean, just going straight to that point of paradox, I think that it's probably the one leadership concept that integrates more explicitly the idea of paradox, right? Because you are trying to reconcile two opposing thoughts almost, right? So typically we think leaders are served, they don't serve, right? So when you talk about servant leadership, it sounds paradoxical, it sounds contradictory. And yet that's the idea of paradoxical leadership. And that's a field of research, by the way, that if you're curious about it, we're more and more seeing that the world of management is filled up with paradoxes. And the best leaders are those who can integrate these opposing thoughts and tensions and make the best use of it, right? So it's, if you want, like this yin and yang concept where those two contradictory ideas, as much as they seem impossible to coexist, they actually need one another. They can make best use of each other. So you can become a better leader by incorporating a motivation to serve, and you can serve better by being a better leader. So that's how you integrate the two. So yes, it's paradoxical, and what we see is that leaders who have a sort of bandwidth, they have what we call behavioral complexity. They can engage in very different types of behaviors, which is interesting, which relates again to authenticity. To what extent are you a chameleon then? I think it relates to what Hannes was saying about political skills, is you understanding your audience, you adjusting your behavior accordingly so that you can accommodate and adjust different contexts. It's very important. What I think is important as well is that if you do it from a place of integrity, if you do it from a core of a genuine motivation to serve, I think that will safeguard that you don't go off in sort of erratic behavior that doesn't make sense, right? I think that's more. I mean, what you mentioned, this is really good. It's like, sometimes, bending reality a bit, or being a bit softer on your comments. When you do it from a place of caring for the other and helping the other, right? It's not that can be perfectly actually recommendable, right? I mean, and there's a good example while you were saying that about Nelson Mandela, and I think it's a good example of what we were just talking about here. There's a moment apparently where they were flying. He was already president at the time, and they were flying in a small jet from somewhere. And there's a lot of turbulence, and the airplane is shaking all the time, and everybody's afraid, right? And people are almost panicking, and Nelson Mandela is sitting in the back of the airplane, just relaxed, reading the newspaper, right? And then everybody thought this guy is made of iron, and then as soon as they land, they get out of the plane. He's the first one saying, "Man, that was scary. I was really afraid." And people looked at him, it's like, why do you say that? I mean, when we looked at you, you were very serene and very calm. I said, well, if you were already afraid, if I would have reacted like that as well, can you imagine what would happen there, right? I had a responsibility of showing this sense of serenity in a moment of crisis, to try to give the example and to get everybody calm. So yes, he was lying. But for that moment, because he cared about them, because he meant to care about the people, in that moment, being able to control their emotions and showing something maybe that doesn't coincide exactly how he feels inside, was the best thing to do, right? So is that inauthentic? If you look at it, strictly speaking, from a consistency perspective between what you feel and what you behave, yes. Was it authentic with your core values? Yes. So I think this authenticity from a place of it was authentic because you mean that you care about your people. And in that sense, that behavior was authentic with that sense of integrity, right? So I think it's how you look at the notion of authenticity here, I think that we need to understand. So, but yeah, so in the meantime, I don't know if I answered your question, if I went off on a tangent, but I just wanted to provide some reflections in connecting these.
Yeah, no, that's very good. Yeah, well, one thing that popped to my mind, and it maybe relate to both of you, that you say it's very important for leaders nowadays, or for servant leaders to serve, to support the employees. Is that something that came up like over the last few decades, or is it something that has been always there, but has been maybe underlined in research? Is that something that current generations need more, that they want to be empowered, be enabled to do their own job rather than being told what to do? Is this something that's generational, or?
It's a very interesting question. I think that the idea of this leader that is mainly there to provide people with the opportunity to shine and to be at their best is not a new concept. You already, even in the writings of Lao Tzu, you already see references to that, right? Saying the best leader, the wise leaders are self-effacing and scanty of words, right? And then the people in the end, they say we did it ourselves. So that sort of thinking was already there. And you see it also in some writings by Thomas Aquinas, and from religion, you also see notions of that sometimes being quite a lot emphasized. But somehow with the Industrial Revolution, with the strong task orientation, especially this metaphor of the organization as a machine, right? You need to run things as a machine and efficiently, and this idea of command and control. So leadership and management became very much associated with command and control, right? Taking charge, telling people what to do. And this idea of the heroic leader also played out quite strongly. So it was gradually, the idea became quite a lot eroded, and it wasn't so much central until more recently, as the world has become more uncertain, meaning that you as a leader can't control everything, right? So you need to learn how to trust other people. As people started having more options, meaning that especially these newer generations where you can travel around the world and get jobs anywhere, right? Meaning that you as an organization, you need to provide more to your people rather than just a job. As this phenomenon starts becoming more and more salient, you see that this idea of servant leadership started resonating more with current management practices. The other day I was describing servant leadership, but this one expert on Scrum teams said, this is exactly the type of leadership we defend in Scrum teams. So servant leadership has this dual interesting effect. One, it's an ethical approach. So you care about people. So people feel that you care about them, and that motivates and gives them a sense of purpose. And interestingly, I don't know if it's a welcoming byproduct of that approach, you create conditions for what we call agile or self-organizing teams, because you empower people and you allow them to work on their own and at their own pace. So it answers to the need for more responsible leadership and the need for more agility. And that's what we need today, right? So, and if I would have said 10 years ago, right, when I first started getting more serious into this, and if you would talk about servant leadership in most organizations, either they would laugh at you, or like this new age, wishy-washy, tree-hugging stuff is not our thing, or they would just entirely dismiss it. But nowadays, it's amazing how many people increasingly ask, we want to have training on servant leadership. So it really became quite central, right? So it's an old concept that has regained new energy in the last few years, given the context we live in.
Yeah. Anders, do you also see that? And also, maybe can you relate to the question that Elena asked? Like, is now the time when authentic leadership is in great demand? Do you see that as well?
The same thing for, we like authentic leaders because they make our lives more simple. They have a few set of core values, and they always are consistent to it. And then when the world around us becomes crazy, it's nice to have a leader who kind of is out of one piece and is clear and is consistent. So yeah, we want more authentic leadership because it helps us deal with the increasing complexity and difficulties of this world. We want the authentic leader to give us stability that the world no longer gives us. And I think that will continue to increase. At the same time, that complex world asks for more politics and more, nuanced truth. And maybe you have very strong religious or political ideas. And guess what? Now you can't be. So there's like a dual tension. On the one hand, we have to be more political and be very nuanced. And at the same time, we want people to be very consistent. And we're not going to solve this.
Now that we've established that we need authentic leaders, Caroline, maybe you can ask some questions about how we can become authentic leaders and servant leaders.
Yes. So, I mean, we're all like young students. We're all gonna start our first job soon. So what advice regarding leadership would you give us as young professionals entering the job market?
Can I, maybe Milton, I'll
Yeah.
in a strange way, I'll jump on this and I'll borrow from servant leadership on this. So when I train young leaders for their first leadership position, one of the very, very first things that they learn is when you are in a leadership position, it's no longer about you. It's not about your achievements. Leadership by definition is your ability to influence others. So you have an other orientation, an other focus. And so that kind of relational or servant lens is one of the very first. It may sound like a simple thing, but to get out of your head, like, I need to do everything. No, you're there to facilitate others to be good. That's kind of your main, and once people get that switch, they start to be ready for leadership positions. But they really, that's one of the very most basic things to get out of your, and the weird thing that we have in organizations is that the people that we consider for promotion are the high achievers. These are people, you give them deadlines, they knock them out of the park. They're very good at getting things done. And so that's very self-focused. Me and whether or not I can get a high grade or achieve it. Right. I mean, you're all here in a CEMS club. I'm pretty sure all of you are those very high achievers. Well, the very first thing is I almost need to beat it out of you with a stick. It is not about you. You're actually there for other people as a leader. And that transition of mind and change in identity, it takes some time. But once people get that, they're on the right track. But Milton, maybe you can say more about that actually.
That's exactly right, Hans. This is like there's in my view, an excessive amount of stuff out there about finding the true self and finding who you really are, and who are you? It seems like the universe revolves around you and it's there to serve you, right? I think actually that you can find more about yourself when paradoxically you care less about yourself. When you see yourself more as an instrument rather than the center of my career, my growth, my leadership. No, it's like Hans has said, it's all about the other, right? So good leadership development programs, in my view, take you out of that place where the world revolves around you and put you in a place where you have to see, how can I actually help and contribute towards others? And that takes also courage from the side of organizations to bet in leadership development programs that are more geared towards that, right, than anything else. So my take would be out there, right? Relate to others, help others. Don't be overly obsessed about who you are. And I think it's important to think every now and then about your values and things you care about, but do it from a place of experience. Do it from a place of, when I engage in this point, when I was trying to help this individual, this organization, what does it tell about me, right? But from that place of an experience rather than sitting on top of a mountain for 6 months and coming up with some sort of enlightenment about who you are. I think that's at least my view. I think that would be an important way of being more servant-like or authentic, right? In striking that balance between being out there, helping others, and at the same time integrating that into your reflective process about what it means about you and what you care about. And you can develop it. It just takes maybe more time and a different approach, right? So, yeah.
Let me follow up to what Milton is saying, just very specific and great advice. If you want to develop this authentic servant leadership approach, do what Milton said in the beginning, this one employer that asked him, but how can I help you? Moving forward, the conversations you're having, whether this is with your friends or your mom or your dad or somebody in your family or a colleague or whatever, right? You get a chance to interact with them. Maybe at the end of the conversation, just ask like, hey, is there anything that I can do for you? Is there any way that I can help you? And just asking that question over and over and over again will slowly get you into kind of a more relational mindset. But as Milton said, reaching out in a genuine way to other people to see how can I be of service to you, it will help you discover yourself.
Yeah.
About who you are and what you have to offer to others, to the world. And so the authenticity part is there developing with it as you reach out to other human beings in a very genuine way. There's another advantage to this simple rule. I don't know if anyone read the book by Adam Grant called Give and Take, where he talks about kind of pro-social behavior in the workplace and why it's important. And he says there are 3 types of people. You've got takers. These are people who kind of go to interactions with the idea, I want to take as much as possible from you. And these people are probably, by the way, very good at like job interviews because they're very good at impression management. You've got matchers. Matchers are people who are like, well, you do this for me, but now I'm going to do exactly the same for you. To get an idea of what that looks like, if you're invited to a wedding and if you're calculating in your head, how much did this wedding really cost? Okay, so that means my gift needs to be approximately that amount of you're a matcher. The people who are most successful though in life are the givers. The people who reach out genuinely to others and see what they can do for others. And you could say like, well, why are these people successful? But because they constantly give their time and their resources away to others. Well, karma, but then scientifically explained, meaning by the positive effect that you have on others, you build your reputation of who you are as a human being. And that positive effect, that positive negative, it flows back to you. True, it flows back to you. And again, wait, I had a good point. No, I lost it.
No, it's just kind of
I should have stopped.
That's all right. It's a really nice book as well, and it just really just confirms the point that indeed being altruistic, being more of a giver, pays back. Contrary to what we think, and contrary to what could be your intuitive, understanding of it, it's actually being a giver actually pays back, but it takes time, right? Takers probably have immediate returns, but over the longer run, they lose out, generally speaking, right? Givers, you need to be smart as well as a giver. It's also something he says in the book, right? You have also, if you're overly naive about it, you might also not work in your advantage. But if you are a sound and reasonable giver, you can really take a lot of benefits because indeed it pays back. People see you as someone they can rely on. You get more access to information, for opportunities. You build credibility in the market. The book even refers to a great example of car salesmen. Even as simple as that, the best car salesmen are those who are more of a giver rather than a taker. Now, the car salesman, when you go to the shop and they come in and say, I want to buy this car, they start asking, why would you want to buy this car? Well, I'm trying to buy one for my wife, blah, 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 blah. Well, maybe you don't need this car. Maybe you need another car. the guy next door to us, actually, don't tell anyone, there's a better car for you. Why don't you go there and try to buy that one? Tell her I came from, that I recommended that for you. You might lose that short-term sale, but you win an ambassador for life. And that's the type of stuff that Hannes is talking about here, that karma is that, over the longer run, you will start taking more advantage of that attitude than what you might think you have. And that's an important thing about career development that I also experienced. And also about building the networks. When you're growing in your career, start by giving. Don't start by asking, what can you do for me? That is the only way of building a network you can rely on. That means that if you need to build your network every day, and you need to work on it every day, knowing that eventually one day that will pay back, but not immediately, right? So start by helping people and volunteering to do things for others. And I started off my career. I want to teach at the university, but I had no accolades at all. So I just started doing it for free. You know what? I'll do it. I'll hold a lesson for you. And my wife even told me, you're stupid. She's Dutch. So it's like, you need to charge for it. And I was like, no, it's okay. I'll do it. And after a year or two, people started asking me, hey, we really liked your class. Why don't you come with us and teach with us for a while? But give without asking anything in return. That really pays back.
And there's, because and there is research to suggest the payback is there. But there's an immediate payback that we should also highlight. For you, for your own integrity, for your own well-being, it feels really good to be meaningful to other human beings. It's beyond the rat race that we play in life where, in the middle of the night, we wake up and we're like, oh my God, will I get this project and will I do that? And to go out on a daily basis and be able to, even if it's just having asked a question, right? Me asking Jeroen, hey, is there anything I can help you with? That Jeroen gets to like, oh shit, Hannes actually cares about me. Whoa, that's amazing. That puts a smile on his face. That makes him feel better. And yes, you will feel better. Not that you do it for that, but again, for those high achievers, and I'm part of the high achievement club, don't get me wrong. It's a really good antidote. And it helps you sleep better at nights. It makes you a healthier human being. And beyond all the things that you might or might not achieve through karma because you're giving, how awesome is it that you'll be happier while doing it? I think we often forget this stuff, right? We're talking about business and results, but there's a short-term benefit to all of this as well. Thought of highlighting that. That's
super interesting. Thank you very much for all of that insight. So what do you think? What is the most important thing a leader should do, in your opinion?
Ooh, that's asking for a very let me think about that. Milton, I think this one is for you.
Now, there's a well-known phenomenon that we often talk about in academia called hubris effect, right? Where you stand, it might be easier to integrate some of these recommendations and some of the things that we're trying to pass on to you. But as you grow in your career, it will be harder and harder to stay mindful of the importance of humility and serving and being authentic. Because suddenly it does seem like the world revolves around you, right? You are in a very important position, you are highly ranked, highly recognized, you make important decisions. And before you know, you start liking yourself too much. And you start believing that indeed everything revolves around you. And then to keep that under control, it's very important that you have a check on that you surround yourself by people who dare to speak up. I think that's a very important element of good leadership, and that also relates with governance, by the way, and checks and balances, is that you are your own devil's advocate and you understand the risks that come with senior leadership. and that you surround yourself with people that can say, I disagree. I think you're thinking, you need to change your thinking, or this decision doesn't sound right, And if you can do that, surround yourself by good, competent teams and avoid just yes men around you, that will ensure not only that you can grow into senior positions, but you stay there and that you are serving the organization and the people and not yourself. And I think that's just my one suggestion. We could spend the whole day talking about that, right? But that would be one suggestion from my side, to ensure that you evolve as a leader and that you don't get affected by this hubris effect.
So I have no idea what Milton just said, because obviously I was thinking about my thing. No, I'm going to hear what Milton was saying. If I have to choose the one thing, Carolyn, and this is something I learned the hard way, through observation, trying to develop people, trying to kind of see leadership in practice, curiosity, specifically curiosity about other human beings. Let me give a few examples. Pablo asked a great question in the chat, which makes me think, like, why does Pablo ask that question? Like, how is he interpreting this material to make him go to that question? I'm looking at Rita, and I'm looking at all the painting frames and the interesting room, and I want to know more about, like, well, what's on the shelf there? Like, what stories are there? A genuine interest in other human beings. Knowing who they are, where they come from, what they do, how they think. Ultimately, as a leader, you have a responsibility to influence, or better word, motivate people. You will best be able to motivate other people if you understand them and you know where they come from. And whether it is using the information that I now gathered on Rita, let's assume that Rita and me just talked for 2 hours, using that information to either design the job in a way that Rita will find interesting and intrinsically motivating, connecting her with the people who actually give Rita energy versus take energy away from Rita, or, sorry, Rita, I'm putting you on the spot here, or when we have to go through a change in the company, using the words that I know Rita will appreciate for why this change is necessary. Too often as a leader, we kind of impose our own truth, kind of what Milton was also referring to, kind of not getting stuck in your own ego and your own head, but having a genuine openness and curiosity towards other human beings. Because that will immediately enhance your leadership effectiveness. Beyond the fact that you're reaching out, you're interested, you make the other person feel good, you're actually getting a lot of, and this is a wrong word, but ammunition for your leadership, right? You're getting stuff that will improve your effectiveness as a leader. Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely. Super interesting. Yeah, so now coming to Pablo's question, we don't have that much time left, but we'll try to squeeze it in. So how does one's personality impact or limit one's ability to be a good leader?
There's some good research on this. They've looked in meta-analysis on, like, how personality is related to leadership effectiveness. And what's interesting about that research, they make this distinction between perceived effectiveness and actual effectiveness. And so things like extroversion or charisma, people often think, like, oh, that's really important. You need to be born as a charismatic, extroverted person, because these introverts, they don't stand a chance. Well, that's bullshit. People think that that's effective. There's no indication that extroverts or charismatic leaders are actually more effective. So we kind of need to dispel that notion. There is just one personality trait that consistently across the board actually helps you to be a better leader, and that's conscientiousness. And conscientiousness means being thorough, reliable, following through on things. Meaning, if you now promise something to your employee that you're going to do something, like, then do it. It's as simple as that.
Which is, by the way, Hannes, just going back to the first word cloud, that central word of responsibility.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there you go. That yeah, that's, man. I feel like we should drop the mic here, because that's like, no.
Yeah. And there's one other thing that I just wanted to very as a final word, and I think if you allow me, because at some point Robert Greenleaf's book on the servant as a leader, there's one passage where he says one of the things that he was more concerned about is good servants, people with a servant heart, kind of not assuming the leadership position they could have, because they tend to be more humble and tend to be more less achievement oriented maybe, but it's a lost opportunity for really great leadership, right? So for those with a servant heart, don't shy away from taking leading positions, right? Assume that aspiration to lead while being mindful of your servant attitude. And that's very important, because the world has too many leader first people with very little servant in their profile. So if you're more of a servant type, altruistic type, a giver type, don't let that shy you away from taking a leading role. All right. So that would be my suggestion.
Nice. I think that's a wrap for today. There's so many questions. There's so much more to talk about. I feel there should be a follow-up session though, or multiple, or I don't know, a class or something. So yeah, thank you very, very much. Let me put this up here. There you go. Thank you very much, Milton and Hannes, for giving us your time, for serving the community. And yeah, it's just great to always hear you talk, and your passion about this topic and about teaching and giving back to others. It's just really inspiring. So thank you for that. I have a few more announcements to make, and one is that at the end you will probably get a survey, or afterwards you will get a survey, and if you could just fill that out, that would help us a lot to find more great speakers like Milton and Hannes, and to talk about more interesting topics like the ones that we discussed today. And then next week we have another episode coming up, and this time it's Massimo and Samuel talking about strategy, and how strategy in the current days, including agility and what other kinds of paradoxes are included in strategy, and how you can use that to develop your company a bit better. So yeah, join us next week again for another episode. Then I would also like to direct your attention to the Alumni Platform, especially relevant for the young alumni with us today. There's the CEMS Alumni Platform. Perhaps you've heard of it, perhaps you use it already, but you can register there and you can connect with other alumni and see what they're up to, and also discover more events like the ones that we had today. And finally, my colleagues from the CEMS Student Board also organized the CEMS podcast, which is similar to the CEMS webinar series. And they talk about similar topics, but then in the podcast form. So if you're interested in more topics like these, you can find the CEMS podcast on Spotify as well. So with that final note, thank you again for the participants joining us today. Thank you again for the speakers. And yeah, have a very nice day and hope to see you again next time.
All right. Take care,
Thank you
guys.
so much.
Thanks,
Very nice.
guys.
Take care.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.